There is a Jordan Peterson video out there on YouTube that has got 1.5 million views. Good on him. That is about the German problem. The German problem, what happened? Why did this German civilization in the 1930s go so horribly wrong? And it features a conversation between Jordan Peterson, psychologist and would-be political commentator, and the historian Niall Ferguson, the historian, I guess popular historian who very much speaks from an Anglo-American establishment position, Niall Ferguson. And they discussed the German question. Why did this perhaps most advanced civilization of the early 20th century descend into the nightmare of the 1930s and 1940s? More than nightmare, the crimes of the 1930s and the 1940s. And why did it go this way and not, for example, Niall Ferguson says, America? We'll come back to that point a little bit later. It's absolutely a worthwhile conversation to listen to. Jordan Peterson, I think, is not very good on history, and Niall Ferguson does patiently school him, but there is a few too many jibes at, Marxism and all that sort of stuff. And I think some of the discussion about the historiography, the best history available on this German question is not all that current. There has been an enormous literature, partly written within Germany itself, that questions, that is a sort of self-reflection on German guilt, let's say, or German culpability, perhaps is a better term, for the crimes of the 1930s and the 1940s. And I didn't really get the sense that Jordan Peterson or Niall Ferguson had really substantially engaged with the full breadth of that discussion, that they were, if you like, drawing on some very dated ideas about the German question for reasons that may well have something to do with their current political concerns. I think their discussion is too much framed by certain orthodoxies of, I guess, the American academic, liberal, imperial, you even might say, establishment. And it is a framing of the German question that frames, I guess, Germany as an aberration, a criminal aberration, and not actually representative in many ways of streams of thought, of ideologies, of political movements, of action that occurred in many countries, including in America. After all, the Ku Klux Klan was pretty active in America in the 1930s and the 1940s. It is, though, a really important question of modern history to come to terms with. What happened in Germany in the 1930s and 40s? And there is so much literature on it. There is so much literature on the leader of the German government in the 1930s and 1940s, who I'm not mentioning his name because I'm told it sort of, impacts on the YouTube ratings. But some of it, there is so much of it that it's a little bit hard to find a way into. So an alternative way into reimagining yourself into the position of the people of Germany in the 1920s and 1930s is through historical fiction, and in particular historical fiction on film. That wonderful television series, Babylon Berlin. Babylon Berlin is must-watch TV, and if you watch this noir blend of historical drama, thriller and crime fiction, you will discover some surprising truths, truths you won't find in Jordan Peterson's video about modernism, modern history, and the multipolar world, and how Berlin, that great 20th century world city, and how Germany is and remains central to the story of modern history, and not just in the usual cliched way presented in Jordan Peterson's video. You know, historical fiction, whether in books, film, television, can help you explore world history and provide new ways of relating the stories of the past to concerns of today. Of course, you need to choose the right fiction. You need to avoid the stereotyped stories of history that are so common, particularly in Hollywood productions. In the era of Netflix, many American historical dramas represent the past as a costume drama of contemporary society. They flatter the present by presenting the past, especially if it involves royal families, as a comic version of ourselves. But the best historical dramas really challenge us to change the stories we tell ourselves about the past and how the modern world came to be. So if you like that kind of historical drama, don't watch Jordan Peterson, don't watch Bridgerton, watch Babylon Berlin. And the other thing is, Babylon Berlin is brilliant entertainment. It's a well-made story with superb realisation of the sets and the feel and the tone of 1920s Berlin. Costumes, brilliant music in the mode of Kurt Weill and German cabaret, modernist art direction and recreation of the mood and of the tensions and of the internal conflicts, both in the minds of characters and in the society of the Weimar Republic, Germany in the golden 1920s, careening towards the German catastrophe of the 1930s and 1940s. We're so used to pictures of like F. Scott Fitzgerald and the Great Gatsby and 1920s flappers and all that sort of thing. We identify 1920s affluence with America, but Germany had its period of affluence as well. Germany had its golden 1920s as well, and in a way it's the shadows and the high points of that society that Babylon Berlin shows so well. Babylon Berlin has two chief kind of co-protagonists, both of whom come as outsiders to Berlin society, which was then self-consciously the cultural capital of the world, and has had a very valid claim to being, you know, the cultural, intellectual capital of the world. There's the police inspector Gerion Raff, who comes from the southern Catholic provincial city of Cologne to take up a role as police inspector, initially in the vice squad. And Charlotte Ritter comes from an impoverished, ailing family of the lumpen proletariat. She works as a prostitute at night and works her way up into the police as an assistant detective, together with Raff, ultimately in the homicide unit. They work together in that homicide unit where they slowly unwind a series of murder cases linked to politics and other conspiracies of both left and right, of domestic and international politics. And they follow the blood from these murders, so to speak, into the fissures of German society, where they meet a cast of characters, both real and fictional. They seek consolation from the traumas they have both experienced in the war, but also in the economic catastrophes of Germany in the 1920s and in the vibrant new consumerist modern culture that blossomed in Germany in the 1920s and in other parts of the world. Before, of course, the fall of economic, social, military and political disaster, not only in Germany, but really ultimately through World War II, the Great Imperial War, across the world. Now, the television series has been an enormous commercial and cultural success. The first season was the most expensive in German television history. It had sold in over 90 countries, including distribution through Netflix. Season 4 was released in October 2022 in Germany and came later to other countries. It's currently screening here in Australia, which is why I'm talking about it. And a 5th and final season is reported to be going to be shot later this year. However, the television series is based on an equally popular series of historical fiction, crime fiction novels by Cologne-based author Volker Kutscher, and this series comprises 9 novels, of which only 5 so far have been translated into English, and they're all set in various dates from 1929 through to 1937 as Germany descends into hell. Now, Volker Kutscher has said that he plans to end this novel series in the year 1938. And he has said that, and here I quote, "I must include the collapse of the German civilization of 1938, by which time even the last apolitical person knew that the Nazi rulers were working towards a world war and the Holocaust, towards the great human catastrophe. It will be bitter and it will not be a good ending for many of my characters, but only then can I close the series." So it is very much a fictional, dramatic working through of many more complexities of the German problem than are discussed in Niall Ferguson and Jordan Peterson's conversation. Babylon Berlin really gives us a wonderful series of compelling images of the past, not to conceal past wrongs nor to evade guilt for past crimes, but to recover the openness of the past. It raised new questions for me about the German question in modern history, which is so often a kind of mental prison in which American and British authors lock the German past inside. The Anglo-American approach to the German question, as recently revived by Jordan Peterson and Niall Ferguson, closes down inquiry about the past. It does not open our eyes to its complex, terrible new beauty. Most of all, Babylon Berlin is a German perspective on the German question, not just some Canadian American, British American, or Scottish American series of observations about what happened in Germany. It is presented in German language with some Yiddish and some Russian, and Russians were a large part of the Berlin population in the 1920s and 1930s, thrown in as well. Indeed, there is a story that some of the commercial investors in the series wanted the whole series to be performed in English in order to suit the American market. But the creators, writers and directors, Tom Tykwer, Achim von Borries and Hendrik Handlog Tenum, sorry Hendrik, struggled with your name there, directly refused to comply. They insisted that this drama about the German question would be performed in German language and culture, not to confirm Americans or Brits in their well-established images of the past. I really admire how Babylon Berlin restores the openness of events and the chaos and unpredictability of German and indeed most nations, societies and politics in the late 1920s. America was a very strife-ridden society in the 1920s. One must add, I think there's been a very important recent history of America in the 1920s that makes that point. Babylon Berlin helps you see modern history more clearly through German eyes by going back in time to 1929, when what everyone knows about the German problem, about Germany in modern history, had not happened yet. By doing so, it makes history more intriguing. It reveals open possibilities that lay before Germany and the world in the 1920s, moral choices that you can see many of the characters wrestling with when, despite defeat in war and economic troubles, Berlin was the proud central node of modern culture, the most important capital in the modern Babylon. In the 1920s, Berlin had over 4 million residents and was one of the 3 biggest cities in the world. Only New York and London were more heavily populated, and only Los Angeles took up a larger geographical area. They had experienced, its citizens had experienced defeat in World War I and crushing economic collapse in the early 1920s. But in Berlin, like many parts of the world, selected affluence returned in the later 1920s, and the new dimensions of modern culture and society bloomed. This was the era of the golden 20s, where Berlin was a central node for the creation of the modern world. The Babylon that was Berlin housed dance, jazz, cabaret, sexual liberation movements, psychology, trauma, responses to trauma. The first real, in many ways, World War I sort of opened up the whole concept of trauma, shell shock, all that sort of thing to modern psychology. It housed modern philosophy, radio, flight, and so much more. And we see the both excited and somewhat fearful and anxious and various responses to all these new aspects of modern life in the series of Babylon Berlin. In high culture, science and modern thought, in many disciplines, Germany was the fountainhead of the 20th century and cultural modernism itself. And indeed, there is a terrific book from 1989 by Modris Eckstein, The Rites of Spring, the Great War and the Birth of the Modern Age, that makes exactly this point. Modris Eckstein writes, Germany has been the modernist nation par excellence of our century. And this history of modernism, which is revealed in Babylon Berlin, de-centers America from the story of the 20th century and reveals disturbing new questions which connect ideas we like to separate. What is liberation and what is repression? What is trauma and what is cruelty? What is avant-garde and what is social violence? What is the difference between German racialized thought and American racialized thought in the 1930s and 1940s? Eckstein summarized this as saying that avant-garde, so much, the tone of so much that was going on in the classic famous Weimar Republic, the avant-garde that was the motor of all this cultural excitement. Avant-garde has for us a positive ring, stormtroopers a frightening connotation. This book, Rites of Spring, suggests that there may be a sibling relationship between these two terms that extends beyond their military origins. Introspection, primitivism, abstraction, and myth-making in the art, and introspection, primitivism, abstraction, and myth-making in politics may bear a blood relationship to the highbrow religion of art proclaimed by many moderns. Now, in a way, in the Jordan Peterson video, they both, Niall Ferguson and Jordan Peterson, do touch on this to some degree. They do touch on the idea that it was the intellectual elite that was part of the downfall of German civilization. More than part, but perhaps was the vanguard of the downfall of German civilization. But I don't think they really do it terribly profoundly. Now, although some historians have criticised Babylon Berlin as perpetuating an Anglo-American myth of Weimar as a doomed republic, I tend to disagree. I think it provokes you, the audience, to reflect on the story they think they know so well, and to think again. It dramatises for the audience the foretold tragedy and the alternative possibilities of modern history in Germany and beyond. It decenters America from the 20th century modernity that its journalistic ideologues like Henry Luce, who coined the term in the 1940s, the American century, and it breaks down the rigidity of the German question and exposes for reflection the haunting beauty and mixed legacy of modernism. I think if we approach Babylon Berlin with an open mind, we get a totally different perspective on Germany's role in modern history, in modernism, and modern culture. We also have an important dramatisation, an important reflection on how both elites, political leaders, and ordinary citizens caught up in all sorts of struggles can get carried away with dangerous, even criminal, and incredibly destructive ideas. And that is an important topic to reflect upon, because we can see the same thing happening in different circumstances. Today, people around the world are wondering about how could this happen in our societies, in our so-called democracies, that something perhaps not so dissimilar to events in Germany in the 1930s and 40s is happening today. The antidote to such crimes, I guess, ultimately is empathy, and historical fiction like Babylon Berlin can help you put yourself in the shoes of people in past times and feel what it was like without knowing how the story ends. I hope you've enjoyed this video on Babylon Berlin and the German question. Do support the channel by sharing, liking, subscribing, or checking out some of the links in the description below about my writing and how you can support me and learn more about seeing the world more clearly with some quality world history. Take care now.